This is Dyke Hendrickson, and this podcast is Life Along the Merrimack. And we're going to be talking about several things today. One of the elements is talking about the river, one is talking about Plum Island, and I think we're all interested in what happens along the river. I want to mention one thing that is a sad thing, and it associates with the river to some degree. Several weeks ago, I had on a guest named Bill Nickelman. He is the owner of the Grog here downtown. And if you're from Newburyport, you probably know about the Grog. Anyway, Bill Nickelman died in recent days, and I just wanted to mention that with a sadness and reverence. Bill was the co-owner of the Grog along with his wife, Nicole, and he passed away within the last week. Bill had come to Newburyport in about 2000. He was a native of California, the Sacramento area, and started working in the Grog in about 2001, perhaps. And he got friendly with Nicole Simpkins, who was the daughter of Richard Simpkins, the owner of the Grog. So Nicole and Bill got married in about 2006, and Bill took on larger responsibilities. So for the last 20 years, Bill Nickelman had been at the Grog, and he was, he's also a member of the Chamber of Commerce here in town. He was a member of the restaurant committee in Newburyport. And so he was a major figure and a beloved figure to those who knew him, and I did, and my wife Vicki did, and perhaps some of you did. I would also mention that Richard Simpkins was one of the great figures of the Grog. He died in about 2014. Richard Simpkins started the Grog in about 1971. In fact, the Grog is celebrating its 50th year in business. And if you know restaurants or bars at all, you'll know that running such an establishment is very difficult. And to do it for 50 years, in the same family or in the same organization is quite something. I mean, think of it yourself. How many restaurants in Newburyport are still around after 50 years? There might be Park Lunch, there might be the Starlight Gallery, but there aren't too many of them around. So I just would like to say, extend my condolences to Nicole Nickelman and to her family. And that is a sad passing of Bill Nickelman. He was 45 years old. He died of complications from cancer. Another thing I would mention, this is a learning process for me. I recently wrote a book titled Merrimack, the Resilient River. Now I'm writing a book called Plum Island, a Vulnerable Gem. And I saw a 2-hour presentation recently about the Merrimack River and Plum Island. So this was in my wheelhouse, if we can call it that. And so one of the things I was interested in, it was done by a professor at the University of Virginia who studies barrier islands. Now, he had studied the Merrimack River for about 8 years and Plum Island because he had been at Boston University before going to teach the University of Virginia. But he said, and this is an interesting thought for me, is that Plum Island is a barrier island, and most barrier islands are quite transitory. In other words, the sand shift, the position can shift. Sometimes it might actually go underwater. And so barrier islands are a very difficult place to set up. And in Virginia, they have barrier islands that the sand shift and the earth moves, as they say. On the Outer Banks, there's numerous barrier islands that are transitory, at least their profile changes significantly. But Plum Island is a barrier island. But Dr. Cohn, who was presenting, noted that the Merrimack River makes Plum Island an unusual barrier island. In other words, so much sand and silt comes down from the Merrimack that there's always extra sand and extra bottom substance along coming down from the river that it actually makes Plum Island quite stable. Now, we do complain about, or we do take note of, numerous changes in the river. And sometimes there's erosion, and we've known houses to actually fall onto the beach or into the ocean. There are storms that wipe away buildings. And in fact, in the early 70s, the Coast Guard station on the northern end of Plum Island was wiped away. And if you walk down through the parking lot at the north end near Reservoir Terrace, you can actually see the outlines of some of the Coast Guard buildings. So as a barrier island, Plum Island has many changes to it, but it hasn't had the situation of disappearing or that the sand goes away. It's a much more stable barrier island. And this was very interesting to me. It's 117 miles long. And as we say, much silt and sand comes down the river all the way from central New Hampshire. It goes into the river and then into the ocean. And sometimes the sand moves to the south, and that'll be along the center in Newbury. Sometimes it moves to the north in Salisbury. Right now, it is not really moving to the north. And from time to time, Salisbury finds itself and its beaches lacking sand. I just mentioned that. I'm learning many things, and about a barrier island, that is one thing that I thought was very interesting. That Plum Island is a barrier island, but much more stable than most barrier islands. Another thing, of course, happened recently in the Merrimack River. There were CSOs over the weekend, and that's combined sewage overflows. That means one of the municipal sewage plants in Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, or perhaps Manchester, New Hampshire, had too much liquid in the sewage treatment plant, meaning it took the effluent from the sewage from residences and industries, and also the rainwater from the streets also goes into the sewage treatment plant. Now, usually the plant is large enough to take the rainwater and the effluent, but when it storms, as it did recently, there's a great deal of too much liquid in the building, and they discharge the whole amount. So millions of gallons of effluent go into the Merrimack River. These are called CSOs. I just mentioned it. Now, Newburyport does not have that situation. We do not release into the river. A major renovation was done to the sewage treatment plant in about 2015, $35 million. And so we can control our rainwater, we can control the sewage. Our sewage does not go into the water, but upstream it does. So I guess the question is, and we've talked about it on this show before, what's to be done? There are thousands, and I say thousands because there are about 2,000 pleasure boats on the Merrimack River these days. There are 1,500 registered at the Newburyport Harbor Master's office and about 500 registered in Amesbury, Salisbury, and upriver. So really, and in addition, there are many boats that go in at Cashman Park here in Newburyport. So the river is full of boats. What's to be done? There is a program underway to make a warning system, to have a major push email to voters, or to have it on websites in cities and the Watershed Council, for instance. That has not been completed. I think it'll be very helpful in the future. I mean, even from your phone, or if you have a laptop on the boat, you could just check in and see, well, where did this CSO come from? How many thousands of gallons are coming our way? And what is the level of debris that will actually be in our direction? That is being worked on right now, but to my knowledge, and there are informal warning systems now, but there is not a major warning system quite yet that is well publicized and, let us say, known to this program, this podcast. But I think that'll help in the future. Cutting down on sewage in the river will also be aided by several programs that have been announced. Manchester, New Hampshire, for instance, has announced it is starting a $132 million program to improve its sewage treatment plant so it doesn't have these CSOs. Now, it's a 20-year program. There'll be state money, there'll be federal money, there'll be city money. But it has been announced, so that's a good thing. The sewage treatment plants in Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill are all under the supervision of the Environmental Protection Agency, meaning that the EPA knows that these cities are discharging CSOs in large numbers, and they've been told they've got to stop doing this or else they're going to be fined. Now, obviously, here's a challenge. They can go to Lawrence, for instance, and say, you have to put $100 million into your sewage treatment plant in the next decade to cut down on your emissions of CSOs. And the folks in Lawrence will say, well, we would like to, but we don't have $100 million. So that's where those three communities are, Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill. They are working with the EPA to try to get federal money and state money to improve their sewage treatment plants. Now, Lori Trahan, who is a congresswoman from the Lowell area, has been very forceful in trying to get federal money to help these communities. Years ago, when Senator Ed Muskie of Maine was involved in creating the Clean Water Act, there were very large federal grants that went to communities such as those in the Merrimack, but also the Connecticut River, the Kennebec River, the Hudson River, the Mississippi. This was a federal program that was terrific because a city would get 90% grant. So if you had a $50 million sewage treatment plant to build, you would get 90% paid by the feds. And it worked. Sewage treatment plants were improved or built along the Merrimack, and that was good. In 1987, President Reagan decided he wanted to put an end to grants. And so there's going to be no more federal money to help build sewage treatment plants. At that time, Senator George Mitchell, also from Maine, came in with a bill that said, please let us get low interest loans. If you're going to take away the grants, please permit us to have low interest loans so these cities can keep their improvements underway. And that's what did happen. And that's what still exists today. There is low interest federal money out there. So cities like Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, and others can go after it. It will cost them some money, but it's about a 1% interest rate right now. And that is quite desirable. So Lori Trahan of the Lowell area, Congressman Seth Moulton from the North Shore are among Congress representatives who are trying to make it easier for these cities to get federal money to improve their sewage treatment plants. So that's just, one of the things that we'll be thinking about in the future. I want to show a couple slides today, and I know that some people watch and some people listen, but I'm going through a couple slides today, and I just wanted to bring up a few points that I like to talk about when thinking about the Merrimack River. And when we talk about clean drinking water, here is a picture of Ellen Swallow Richards. She improved drinking water with new scientific methods. She lived in 1880 or was a professional from about 1880 to 1920 or so. She was the first woman graduate of MIT, and she was among a group that helped wipe out typhoid on the Merrimack River. In about 1890, there was a typhoid outbreak in Lawrence. The water, of course, was scientifically treated, but not very well. So there was a government commission at the state level that named a number of scientists from MIT to go up to Lawrence and try to work on the situation of how the water could be healthier and not and perhaps stop typhoid. And she and others did. And she really was a remarkable woman. 6 or 8 men were on the panel. I chose her. If there's a woman who is prominent in history, I'd like to highlight them because they haven't gotten so much attention. But anyway, she was an all-star at that time. She also is known as a mother of home economics. In other words, she lived in Cambridge, and she would go to homes and have seminars about healthier kitchens, or how to make healthier meals, or how to improve the cleanliness of your home, so there would be less outbreaks of disease, and typhoid is another thing. And this might appear old hat to us now, but at the time, going in and talking about cleaner kitchens and better eating habits was quite new. She also started, or was one who started, an organization known as AAUW. That was the American Association of University Women. So she was a real all-star, and her name was also quite appropriate. Her maiden name was Ellen Swallow. And if you're going into the drinking business, it's Ellen Swallow. Sounds like a good name to have. She married Professor Richards and became Ellen Swallow Richards, but she is one of the heroes of the Merrimack River. Another hero of the Merrimack River is Ed Muskie, Senator Ed Muskie of Maine. He sponsored the Clean Water Act, and this image that you're looking at was from his early days in Washington. Here's a shot of him when he ran. He ran as vice president with Hubert Humphrey, but Humphrey and Muskie did not win. He tried to run as a nominee for president in 1972. He did not win, but he certainly was a winner when it came to clean water. Here is a photo of him in Washington pushing for the Clean Water Act. And this Clean Water Act actually has become well known in the Merrimack River Valley. When people say, well, when I grew up in the 50s and 60s, the river was a mess. And then they'll say, but they had that Clean Water Act in 1972, and starting in the 70s, it got better. So yes, it did get better, and Ed Muskie was a big reason. Here is Senator George Mitchell of Maine. He was instrumental in passing the amendments of 1987 that helped clean up the rivers. And remember, President Reagan didn't want to have grants anymore, but Senator Mitchell was able to pass a measure that enabled communities to get low interest loans to improve the sewage treatment plants. Here's a hero of the Merrimack River Valley, Paul Tsongas. He was a champion of Lowell, helped the University of Lowell move into a strong position, and he was, strong in many areas, including the Civic Center in Lowell. Here's a photo, I love this one, of he and his family. That's his wife, Nikki. She, of course, succeeded him in Washington. She was a congresswoman after he passed away. Here is the grave adjacent to the Merrimack River of Paul Tsongas. It's a beautiful spot, as you can see, buried along the river. He died in 1997 at the age of 56, which was a great sad event, but he certainly is remembered. Here's the Whittier Bridge in Newburyport, Amesbury, that was built not long ago. And here's a photo that really represents the good and the bad about the Merrimack River. This is the Nashua River in the 60s, not the Merrimack. But the Nashua is a tributary to the Merrimack River and puts a lot of water into it. But you can see the left photo from the 1960s shows a river just orange, actually. On the right, in 2012, the river is flowing. It's quite clear. There's white water there, and it looks pretty darn good. And so one thing that occurred was in the old days, and as you know, there were many mills, woolen mills and cotton mills on the Merrimack River. In the old days, and this goes back to the 19th century, but it happened in the 20th century as well, if mills were ready to dump if they were making, say in this case, some cloth that day and they were using orange dye, well, they would put just let much of the refuse and the dye go right into the river. And here you can see that the river turned orange. And that's one of the things that the Clean Water Act did in 1972. It had federal regulations, state regulations, and it said you just can't dump anymore. And even the industries had to build sewage treatment operations. Here is the Merrimack River up in the Methuen area. It shows a couple shopping carts in the water. The river doesn't look too clean. And you're looking at a large drainage pipe. This does not come from a sewage treatment plant. This comes from the street. But you can just see how foul the river can become. And in recent years, I worked on the daily news here in Newburyport from about 2012 to 2017. There were many instances where you would see cars being pulled out of the river, or tires, or bicycles, hypodermic needles. I mean, many bad things can get into the Merrimack. Here is a shot from Newburyport. This is on the boardwalk along the Merrimack River. And again, that pipe you're looking at in the lower left corner is a drainage pipe that picks up rainwater. This is not from the sewage treatment plant. Here's an individual who has helped a great deal, Senator Diana DeZoglio from Methuen. She's a state senator that covers Newburyport and about 7 or 8 communities. She was very instrumental in the last couple of years. She got the Merrimack River Commission started. She has gotten money to look into a warning system for pollution on the river. And she's going to be my guest in several weeks on this podcast. And again, if you're listening, this is Life Along the Merrimack podcast, 96.3 FM radio, Joppa radio, and local Channel 9 and cable TV. Here's a picture perhaps you didn't expect to see Richard Nixon today, but here he is on the left. He was president when the Environmental Protection Agency was created in 1970. Hubert Humphreys in the center, and Ed Muskie, who we talked about, is on the right. In 1972, the EPA was in full bore. Also at that 1970, the Clean Water Act was passed. And so even though Nixon turned out to be a bit of a rogue during Watergate, his name is on the creation of the EPA in 1970. I'm doing a book now called Plum Island, a Vulnerable Gem. And here are a couple photos I wanted to show you about Plum Island. Here's a woman who isn't well known, but she was instrumental in helping preserve Plum Island. Her name was Annie H. Brown. She was a wealthy bird lover and Audubon Society member from Stoneham. And in 1928, she gave about $25,000 so that part of Plum Island could be purchased so it could be a sanctuary for birds. Different things happened. The Audubon Society got involved. Later, it was created the Parker River National Wildlife Refuge, which we have today. But her gift helped the southern end of Plum Island to remain wild. And much of that land did create the National Wildlife Refuge. So here's a woman, as I say, when I see women in history, I try to highlight them, who did a great deal for Plum Island. The dunes of Plum Island were sites of socialization. Here's an old postcard from Plum Island. People would go down and they would enjoy, they would have picnics along the dunes, and it looked like a good time. Now, it's since been of concern to me as to how did these people go clean after they sat on the dunes for 3 hours? You know, I go swimming at Plum Island quite a bit, and, you know, I'm in a bathing suit. I do what I can to clean up, but I'm still sandy when I get home. So I shall have to look into this as I pursue my Plum Island book. How can you sit on Plum Island for 3 hours and not become dusty and have a problem cleaning your clothes? I love this photo. It's from the Plum Island Pavilion about the turn of the 20th century. Families could take a trolley from downtown Newburyport to reach the island. And after a picnic, they could go in and dance at this pavilion. And that seems like a lot of fun. I think on the right, actually, that might be a bandstand for bands that came along. Now in the 40s and 50s, or let me say the 30s and 40s, a pavilion was there. During the week, it was roller skating. On weekends, they had bands. So it was, could be a lot of fun. Again, they did have a train that went down from the middle of Newburyport. It would stop at the pavilion. People could get off. And so in the days, say from 1920 to 1930, 1900 to 1930, it's a situation, many people didn't have cars, so a trolley would take you to Plum Island. Here's Sandy Beach on Plum Island. It's a great retreat. It's a state retreat. You've got to get there early. There are only about 14 parking spots. The northern end of Plum Island, Reservoir Terraces at the left. And as you can see, the jetties deep in the background. It's, a wonderful place. In recent years, of course, many houses have been built. And if there was a small house there, frequently the small house would be taken down. And in recent years, the 6 and 8 bedroom houses have been built. And so and I know why they build them. I've been out to Plum Island. Josiah Welch was a prominent businessman and community leader here in town for more than 5 decades. He had a place on Plum Island. My wife and I were sometimes invited there. It is a beautiful place to sit down, and I can see why people want to be there. This is the end of my presentation. I want to, thank you for being here. I mentioned Bill Nickelman, the owner of the Grog, recently died. He was on this show just several weeks ago. He was here because the Grog just turned 50 years of age. And so this is, there will be an obituary coming out in the local paper in coming days, but I wanted to mention him and, honor his memory because he was a guest here. He offered a lot to Newburyport, and that was a sad event. So that's it for me. I'm Dyke Hendrickson. This is a cover of my new book, Merrimack, the Resilient River, an illustrated profile of the most historic river in New England. And my next book will be Plum Island, a Vulnerable Gem. This is 96.3 Joppa Radio. We're also on local Channel 9 on cable TV. Please see us at 2 o'clock. We're also archived on YouTube. So in fact, the interview with Bill Nickelman, who I just mentioned, is archived on YouTube. If you want to hear about the history of the Grog, or if you knew Bill, this is a wonderful interview. He was a very good subject to interview. And, as a journalist, I always, make my own thoughts about this, because some people will give you a mono answer, just a few words, but Bill took the bait. You asked him a question, he gave you a full answer, and he ran the Grog for about the last 20 years. So that's it for me. This is the podcast, Life Along the Merrimack. We'll be here next week again, Tuesday at 2. In several weeks, we'll have Diana DeZoglio, the state senator, and we'll get together at that time. Thank you for being here, and have a good week.